Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The day Erica first held the sword, the skies above her family's crumbling estate darkened. It was as if the heavens themselves acknowledged the weight of the burden she was about to carry. She'd been warned, of course, for as long as she could remember. Every child in her family grew up with the story of the Dark Messenger, a tale passed down from generation to generation, always the same, whispered in dark corners by frightened parents and eager children. One day, her mother would say, "One of us will become the Dark Messenger. It is our family's curse." For years, Erica had listened to the tale with a mix of fascination and dread, though never truly believing that it could be her. How could it? She was the youngest daughter of a family barely scraping by, their once proud lineage eroded by scandal, misfortune, and time. No one looked at her and saw destiny. They saw a pale, thin girl with dark hair that never seemed to stay neat and eyes too large for her narrow face. They saw a girl born into a world that had long since forgotten her family. But that all changed the day she found the sword of Kronos. It had been a cold morning when she descended into the crypt beneath her family's estate, her breath misting in the still air. She hadn't intended to go there. In fact, she had been warned not to. But curiosity had a way of getting the better of her, and the hidden passageway beneath the estate had beckoned to her, its dark winding staircase, promising something forbidden. The crypt was nothing like she had imagined. No bones, no coffins, just endless rows of ancient stone walls, lined with carvings that had long since faded with time. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and upon it, the sword. It was longer than any weapon she had ever seen, its hilt wrapped in worn leather, and its blade gleamed faintly in the dim light. The sword seemed to hum as though it were alive, waiting. A strange feeling filled Erica as she approached the blade. It was as if the air around her had thickened, like walking through water. Her heart pounded, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through her veins. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and wrapped her hand around the hilt. The moment her skin touched the leather, a wave of power surged through her body. She gasped, nearly dropping the sword, but something kept her hand steady. It was as if the sword wanted her to hold it. As soon as she lifted the blade, the world around her shifted. Colors bled together. Time itself seemed to stutter and collapse. And in the distance, she saw visions, flashes of what was to come. Her family standing triumphant over their enemies, their fortune restored, their name whispered with reverence once more. And then just as quickly the vision darkened, the triumphant figures twisted into shadows, consumed by fire and ash, their voices screaming in anguish. Erica saw herself standing in the midst of the destruction, her hands stained with blood, the sword clutched tightly in her grip. She staggered back, the vision fading as quickly as it had come. But the sword remained heavy in her hand. She knew in that moment that her fate was sealed, the prophecy was real. She was the Dark Messenger, and this sword, the cursed sword of Kronos, was the key to her family's salvation or their ruin. The first time Erica used the sword, she was desperate. The day had begun like any other with her father, pacing the halls of their estate, muttering about debts and failed alliances. Their land, once vast and prosperous, had dwindled to a few meager acres. Their wealth, once envied, was now little more than a distant memory. And now their neighbors, the once friendly Duke of Eisenfeld, were threatening to seize what little remained. "They'll take everything," her father had said that morning, his voice shaking with anger and fear. "Everything we have left, our land, our title, will be nothing." Erica had listened in silence, her hand resting on the sword that now never left her side. It had been weeks since she had first found it in the crypt, and though she had yet to use its power, she could feel it pulsing, urging her to act. The visions had grown more frequent, more vivid, and always the same. Her family, standing on the brink of ruin, saved by her hand or destroyed by her choices. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to blink into existence, Erica stood at the edge of her family's estate, her heart pounding in her chest. The Duke's men were coming, she knew it. They would arrive by morning demanding their due, and there would be nothing her family could do to stop them. Unless her fingers tightened around the hilt of the sword, she could stop them. She had the power. All she had to do was use it. The thought filled her with dread and exhilaration in equal measure. She had read the legends, heard the warnings. The sword of Kronos could bend time, twist fate, but it came at a cost. Each use drained the life of its wielder. Every second stolen from time was a second taken from her. But what choice did she have? Taking a deep breath, Erica drew the sword from its sheath, The blade gleamed in the moonlight, casting an eerie glow over the darkened landscape. She closed her eyes, focusing on the power that pulsed within the sword, and with a single motion, she slashed the air before her. Time shuddered. The world around her warped, the stars above her blurred into streaks of light, and for a moment everything went silent. When the world righted itself, Erica stood in the same spot, but everything had changed. The sun was high in the sky, and in the distance, she saw the Duke's men already at her family's gate. But they were confused, their horses restless, their weapons drawn as though preparing for a battle that had already happened. Erica felt the weight of the sword in her hand, heavier than before. She had done it. She had reversed time just enough to give her family the advantage. The Duke's men had been caught off guard, thrown into disarray by a shift they could not comprehend. But the cost, she could feel it. Her chest tightened, a sharp pain radiating through her limbs. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her vision blurred, and when she caught her reflection in the nearby fountain, she barely recognized herself. Her skin had paled, her eyes sunken, and there was a streak of silver in her dark hair that hadn't even been there before. The sword had taken more than time. It had taken a piece of her. Erica stood victorious that day, her family as estate safe for now. The Duke's men had retreated, their confidence shaken, and her father, oblivious to the sacrifice she had made, praised her for her cunning. But Erica knew better. As the days passed, she found herself haunted by the sword, its power. Every time she looked at it, she felt the weight of the curse pressing down on her. And yet the temptation was always there. The visions had grown stronger, more insistent, showing her glimpses of a future where her family ruled once more, where their name was spoken with reverence, and where she, Erica, stood at the center of it all. All she had to do was use the sword again. And so she did. Erica did not wait long before the sword called to her again. Each day, as her family reveled in their newfound safety, she felt its pull growing stronger, like a whisper at the back of her mind, relentless and insistent. Her father, oblivious to her growing weakness, spoke of plans to expand their influence, to rebuild the fortune they had lost. He spoke of alliances with wealthy families, of old debts that could be collected, of enemies that could now be crushed. Erica listened, her fingers absently tracing the hilt of the sword, feeling its pulse beneath her touch. She knew what it wanted, and part of her wanted it too. The next time came sooner than she expected. An invitation arrived from the Duke of Eisenfeld, requesting her father's presence at a grand ball, a gesture of goodwill, or so it seemed. But Erica knew better. The Duke had never forgiven them for the humiliation at the gates, for the way his men had been forced to retreat with no explanation. Their confidence shattered. This ball was no olive branch. It was a trap. Her father, ever the optimist, dismissed her concerns. Cricket's politics, Palati said, waving her off. We must play the game if we are to rise again. The Duke cannot afford to be our enemy forever. But Erica could feel the weight of the sword at her side, heavier than it had been before. The visions had grown darker, more chaotic, showing flashes of betrayal, of blood, of fire. And always in the center of it all, the Duke stood smiling. The night of the ball, the estate was alive with preparation. Her father dressed in his finest clothes, his mood light, for the first time in years. Erica, however, could not shake the feeling of dread that clung to her like a shadow. She dressed in silence, her hands trembling as she fastened her cloak, the sword concealed beneath it. When they arrived at the Duke's estate, the grandeur of the event did little to ease her fear. The ballroom was filled with nobles from every corner of the land, all of them eyeing each other with thinly veiled suspicion, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. The Duke himself greeted them at the entrance, his grin wide and false as he welcomed her father with open arms. Lord Davern, the Duke said, his voice too loud, too cheerful. It is an honor to have you here, and this must be your lovely daughter, Erica. Erica forced a smile, her hand instinctively moving to rest on the sword hilt beneath her cloak. Daria, the honor is ours, your grace. The Duke's eyes lingered on her for a moment too long, his smile growing sharper. I trust you will find our hospitality to your liking, he said, his tone dripping with something that made her skin crawl. As the night wore on, Erica kept to the shadows, watching the room with a wary eye. Her father, oblivious to the tension, drank and laughed with the other nobles, unaware of the danger that lurked just beneath the surface. The Duke moved through the crowd like a predator, his gaze constantly shifting, his smile never faltering. It wasn't until the dance began that Erica felt the shift in the air. The music slowed, the lights dimmed, and the nobles moved to the center of the room, pairing off an elegant practiced motion. But Erica did not move. She stood at the edge of the room, her heart pounding in her chest as the vision flashed before her eye. Blood, fire, scream. She turned, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the Duke standing just behind her, his eyes fixed on her with a predatory gleam. "Would you care to dance, Lady Erica?" he asked, his voice smooth and unctuous. For a moment, she hesitated, her hand tightening around the hilt of the sword. She could feel its power pulsing beneath her skin, urging her to act to strike. But she knew that if she used it here in this place, in front of all these people, the cost would be greater than she could bear. "I am afraid I must decline, Your Grace," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear that churned in her gut. The Duke's smile faltered for the briefest of moments, and in that instant, Erica knew she had made a mistake. His eyes darkened, and he stepped closer, his breath hot against her skin. "You cannot refuse me," he whispered, his hand reaching for her arm. Erica moved before she had time to think, drawing the sword from beneath her cloak in a single fluid motion. The air around them seemed to freeze, the music fading into a distant hum as the blade gleamed in the dim light of the ballroom. The Duke eyes widened in shock, his hand dropping to his side as he stumbled back. "What is this?" he gasped, his voice trembling with fear. Erica didn't answer. She didn't have to. The sword had already done its work. Time bent around them, twisting and warping as the room blurred into a haze of shadows and light. She could feel the power coursing through her veins, stronger than it had ever been before, pulling her deeper into the void. She knew the cost this time would be higher, but she didn't care. She couldn't. With a final breath, she slashed the air before her, and the world around her shattered. When the world came back into focus, Erica was standing alone in the center of the ballroom. The nobles had vanished, the lights had dimmed, and the only sound was the distant echo of the wind outside. She turned, her heart pounding in her chest, and saw the Duke lying on the ground before her, his body twisted and broken, his eyes wide with terror. She had done it. She had stopped him, but at what cost? Her body felt heavy, her limbs weak, and when she looked down at her hands, she saw that they were trembling uncontrollably. The sword, once gleaming and powerful, now felt like a lead weight in her grip. She could feel the life draining from her faster than ever before, and she knew that she didn't have much time left. But there was no going back now. The prophecy was in motion, and she was trapped in its web. The sword would continue to take from her piece by piece until there was nothing left. But she would use it again. She had to, for her family, for her father, for the name she carried. She would wield the sword until her last breath, no matter the cost. The days blurred together after that night. Erica found herself using the sword more frequently, each time pushing the boundaries of what was possible, each time feeling a little more of herself slip away. The visions continued to plague her, growing darker and more violent with every passing day. She saw her family's future laid out before her, glorious and terrible, intertwined with blood and power. Her father, ever the optimist, saw only the victories. He saw the lands they had reclaimed, the debts they had settled, the alliances they had forged. He didn't see the toll it was taking on her, the way her skin had grown paler, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes hollow and dark. "You were doing it," he would say, his voice filled with pride. "Dear, you re-saving us, Erica. You re-bringing us back." But Erica knew the truth. She wasn't saving them. She was damning them. The day came when the sword demanded its final price. It was her brother, her sweet, innocent brother, who had always looked up to her, who had always believed in her. He had fallen ill, a strange sickness that the healers could not explain. Erica knew deep down that it was the sword, Sei, doing a punishment for her defiance, a reminder that she could not escape her fate. She tried to fight it, to resist the pull of the sword set's power, but in the end she gave in. She couldn't watch her brother die. Not like this. She would use the sword one last time, just enough to save him, just enough to make things right. But as she lifted the blade, she felt something break inside her. The sword, sour, surged, stronger than ever before, and time itself seemed to twist and fracture around her. She slashed the air, trying to reverse the sickness, trying to heal him. but it didn't work. Each time she used the sword, her brother Shun's condition worsened, his body racked with pain as the sickness spread. Erica screamed, slashing the sword through the air again and again, her strength fading with each strike. She could feel the life draining from her faster and faster until her vision blurred and her body collapsed to the ground. In her final moments, as the world darkened around her, she saw the truth. The sword had never been a tool of salvation. It had always been a curse designed to twist fate, to mock those who tried to defy it, and she, Erica, had been its greatest fool. As her strength faded, hated it. She closed her eyes, her breath shallow, her heart slowing. She had failed. The prophecy had come to pass, and she had been nothing more than a pawn in its cruel game. As the darkness closed in, Erica felt a strange sense of peace. She had fought, she had tried, and though she had lost, she had done it on her own terms. The sword lay still beside her, its curse broken at last. The mockery of fate had come to an end.